Hey guys, today we speak about the cool question of what actually makes products successful and how can AI and analytics help. And we have a very nice guest today, Nils Stotz. He's currently head of product at Zalando, which you probably know is quite famous also for the experimentation culture. But he was also at 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃backed startups. And he's also an author, writes like research papers. So a lot of things to gain insights from, I think. So nice to have you here. And yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for the invite. I really appreciate it and looking very much forward to talk about these topics.
Nice. I mean, maybe if you would like explain to a person that doesn't know you in a very short sentence, what would you say? What do you do every day at work and what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think you summarized it quite well already, right? So I'm leading the experimentation platform team at Zalando. And of course, what we essentially do is to enable all the different product teams at Zalando to run as many experiments as possible. When I say experiments, I mean A/B tests, but also more complicated tests like holdout tests. And we essentially make sure that, like the assignment is correct so that the randomization is working in the logic that we want it to work. And also, of course, that the measurement is accurate so that the, metrics and so forth that everyone is using are ultimately reliable. This requires quite a lot of effort at a large company like Zalando because we have like more than 60 million customers and, there is just a lot of traffic and there are also a lot of teams that focus on very distinct parts of the platform or parts of the product. And therefore, there's a lot of maintenance work, but also there's, of course, a lot of innovation, which also is related to the AI topic, which I can expand, of course. And that's essentially what I do day by day.
Okay, and I guess just maybe for those people who are absolutely not in experimentation at all, right? I always say, right, just to explain to others why we even do this is because, I mean, you can be as smart as you want, right? Yeah. But at the end of the day, we are not users. And like at the end of the day, we're trying to check if our assumptions or the hypothesis, right, that we have actually hold up. Do you have anything to add to that definition?
Yeah, I recently heard like quite a good pitch about this, right? Like, I mean, data and being data driven is of course like super important and you need to use it in your product work. But ultimately, this is looking into the past, right? So you look into the past to explain the future. And I think experimentation and A/B testing is really the part that makes this even more actionable. So you basically do not only have data for something that happened in the past, but you rather set up your product in a way to collect data for the things that you're changing, right? And there are, of course, then different use cases, as you mentioned, right? Like confirming a hypothesis, but also like making sure that the change that you're creating or that you're making actually has impact and how much impact it has, right? So this is very important, yeah.
Yeah, and a change, I guess, could either be like a new feature that you build for a product, but it could also be maybe like turning something off, right? Sometimes, or I don't know, implementing a UI change, a simple one where you think, hey, maybe if I put the button like here, it might make people click more. That's, I guess, what the normal types of things, right?
Yeah, you might be surprised. I mean, those are my favorite tests, right? My favorite experiments are like removing things and like making things easier or like changing them and moving them around. As I already mentioned, right? Like the complexity of like products that have been around for a while is quite large, right? So if you make changes that like affect various systems, or also the experiment becomes quite complicated, right? So and at the same time, if you have a lot of traffic, a very simple change has like a very huge effect, right? So the nicest things is if you just move a button from the top to the bottom or like above the fold, beyond the fold or something like this. And then you see just major effects and you know immediately how this boils down basically on your GMV or revenue. So that's actually very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also very exciting. I don't find too many people who really like deal with this too much, right? Especially I do a lot of analytics trainings. It's still a lot about looking at like a dashboard and then like, the number is up, down, but you really don't know why it's up or down, right? And I noticed they always ask me like, why does it happen, right? And I always tell them like, just by looking at this, we can only make assumptions at best, right? And maybe it will even hurt you if you start to make assumptions right now. And then you would like need to go the next step to someone like you, right? And say, hey, let's test if this really is the reason why it happens, right? So think very powerful, actually, I think.
Yeah, and like also like this goes back to this, you know, like observational data versus like experimental data, right? There is a hierarchy of evidence, right? And on top of this hierarchy of evidence, there is usually randomized controlled trials, right? Maybe there's meta-analysis or something like this on top. But like very on the top, there are randomized controlled trials, which is another word for A/B test, essentially, right? And this is really like the highest, or like the gold standard, it's often called in like science. And this really tells us like, you know, like you don't have to guess or discuss about correlation and causation, which is the case in observational data, right? You can see like a clear correlation in some data, right? And then you can think like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And, you know, like create a reason why you think this influences each other. But it might just not be a causation because they're confounding factors and that you didn't consider. And this sounds silly, right? But it just happens a lot, like because there are just so many factors that affect the experiences of users. And you can only do this if you, randomize the experiences and then do use different treatments and control and basically measure this against each other. And the delta is the effect.
Yeah. And what would you say, how did you end up there? Because like, I know that you went to the same university that I do my master's at the moment. And then like you had like finance, I see business administration. And I know that you basically started your work in the product area. But when did it start to first notice that hey, maybe this might be a thing we should think about?
Oh yeah, that's actually a good question. Like we are talking about the University of Mannheim, of course. I think it's worth to mention this, right? And I did my bachelor there in business administration, and ultimately, you know, like I was studying business administration and finance, so it was always like numbers and like metrics and stuff like that I was interested in. It's just like, you know, like usually you end up then in consulting and finance, but like I found this interesting, of course, but also to some extent a bit superficial. So I at some point wanted to also like be really in a company and like drive this forward. But back then, like when I started my career, I essentially didn't really know like what you can actually contribute, because finance functions usually, you know, they look at the past, they do accounting, and they just do reporting and stuff, right? And there was a position that was called entrepreneur in residence at GetSafe, which was the first company I worked at. And essentially, like this turned out to be a product role really quick. And in this product function, I basically had no idea what product management is actually doing, right? And then I really, understood, okay, there's growth product management and they work very scientifically. And then you get exposed to like A/B testing and experimentation really quick. And like this, you know, like this, what we just discussed just resonated so much with me. And I didn't see this so much around me, right? So, and this was just such a superior approach that you can just show everyone that what you just did, right, is really affecting like, how users interact with your product. And this is something back then I enjoyed so much, and I read so many things about this, right? And this just continued throughout my journey. Also, like, you know, like when we started the growth team at Contentful, for example, and ultimately now I'm basically on the other side. So it's not like I'm, you know, like in these customer facing teams, but I basically enable all these teams that are directly customer facing. But the advantage that I have is essentially that I know what this experience is like. And so I can really relate to all of this. So, this is essentially the journey, and experimentation and like data-driven decision-making was always a core part, right?
Yeah. Nice. And actually, I recommend everyone to check out your LinkedIn, because I just had it open while you were speaking, and it almost reads like an A/B test. Because it says like before, right? It was like this, then I was there and we did these types of things, right? And it had the effect. So I think like it really also changes how you probably think about life. At least I noticed that the moment I first heard the sentence, like what you said, also correlation, right, doesn't imply causation. I see so many different things very differently when you hear something in the news, when you like, read a paper, also when you look at a study and you just want to understand, is it reliable, right? How did they get to the conclusion? So it's very fascinating that you do this and that you enable others, right? And I think that's also what your research is going into the direction, right? Of like sharing these insights, understanding, basically how product teams do these types of things.
Yeah. I mean, with regards to my, so first of all, as you said, right, everything around us, right, is basically a discussion about like observational data, like especially also in politics, and also like, like that's why these folks from Stanford that recently moved to Zurich, like won the Nobel Prize for economics, because they basically showed how to use randomized controlled trials to see how policies affect the population, right? And this is another proof for me that this is such a superior method that we can not only use like in software development. In software development, it's of course very easy because you have a lot of user and a lot of tech already involved, but you can use it everywhere, right? Essentially. And like my research is mainly about like, exactly as you said, right? Like how this can be implemented in a product development teams, right? So this goes into, let's say, how you organize a team, but also like how you structure an organization. And also like, for example, like goal setting. I think like one of the most well-received paper was about like the metrics that you're essentially using for experimentation program management. And I think the science around like some statistical concept and things like this, it is quite advanced, right? So there's a lot of papers around this, but I think the organizational aspects that come with this is actually like something that is a bit neglected. And this is sort of the thing that I want to fill, right? And also connect this more with product management.
Yeah, but I love also how you said it, because I know that there's some other research centers also in Oxford, and I know at LMU as well, right? Which are kind of like trying to get to the, I think they call it the science of startups, or you could also say the science of product success, right? And instead of saying, hey, like everything is luck, right? And it's how good can you pitch your product, right? Maybe there's other things that you could actually learn something from that others did, or that you did, right? That you can learn something long-term from and benefit from. You definitely have to give me the name from the people that you mentioned that went from Stanford to Zurich, because I don't think I know, or maybe I don't know about that part of the history.
There's a post that I made on LinkedIn about this.
Okay.
I think 𝗺𝗲𝗺𝗆, I remember, like, but I can tell you later for sure.
Yeah. Okay, but it's very interesting, and I think it's also cool for others to see, because that's also what I always like to say. Like you only know me since like the last year, but when I was very young, which you could still say I'm still very young, but when I was like 18, I was absolutely, let's say I was just doing a lot of random things in my life. I didn't have so much of a plan. And if you would have told me that like 10 years later, I would be talking to some people about analytics and AI, right? I would have not believed that this could even be something that I would be capable of speaking about or even be interested in, to be honest. So I think it's just cool with all the people I speak, right, to see where they come from. Like another guy was, for example, he was a wind turbine engineer, or another guy was like a biostatistician, like talking about how to build viruses, and they both became data scientists, for example. So it's just fascinating also to see your journey.
Yeah, I mean, you see like, I mean, you see different or you see similar career moves, like also in product management, right? Like these professions or these things that come up basically more or less every year, like new professions, like analytical engineering is a good example. This is just new, right? And like no one knew that this would exist, right? And I think also in product management, like the people that, you know, like I interview and stuff, it's always interesting, like where they come from. And I also think you benefit from all of this, right? Like I think, for example, like there was one person who studied sociology, which is of course also, in my opinion, quite helpful because it teaches you like how to interview people, but also like the data part plays a role. So it really goes into like this sort of like T-shaped, you know, professional that really has like one key skill, but like a broad range of like other skills. So I think this is very important in nowadays society. Yeah.
100%, and I love that it happens, right? But you're German, I'm German. We know it's a lot about the degree and so on, and like there's a lot of professions where you cannot just like join because like you are curious about it. So I think it is 100% positive. I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, 100%. Like just little anecdote. Like for example, I wanted to be a teacher for some time, right? And I think just like what I learned there about humans and so on also helps me a lot when I think about analytics. Right? Because like a lot of people, for example, would not like they think from their point of view. For example, they think like, that's a logical interface, right? But you don't know what you don't know until you have met the person who clicks for some reason with their elbow onto the screen to try to buy a product, right? Which can happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's
And
all about like what you make out of it for sure. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe one thing that I think is something that also connects the both of us quite a lot. And I notice a lot of companies have problems with. I mean, Zalando, how many users do you have? Just to double check.
More than 60 million.
Yeah, I mean, right? How many other companies exist that have that many people to test on? Probably not so many, and that's I think a big problem, right? Especially like smaller organizations, they also want to do A/B tests and stuff like this, and then they often notice, hey, I actually cannot do any A/B tests unless I have like 3 months or 4 months or 6 months of time to wait for the results. And in this area, I think especially right what happens right now with like AI, I think is quite interesting. We also both know the founder of 𝗵𝗵𝘁𝘂𝗹𝗹, right, who is also in this area. And I would just like to know from you, how do you think will product management, or maybe more importantly, the analytics and experimentation side change when AI gets more introduced over time?
Yeah, I mean, of course, how I always see it is like I see two main dimensions, right? So the first dimension is sort of like the whole process when it comes to like experimentation in particular, but I would say data science in general, right? So when it comes to experimentation, for example, I mean, like I went through this like so many times that I can tell you like roughly like that there are like different steps. So you have an ideation, you create a hypothesis, you design the experiment. And all these steps, right, like in every step, basically you have several use cases on how to implement AI. I wrote one paper about this. So you have 8 different steps and 23 different use cases of AI. Right. So just to give you one random example, right? If you create a hypothesis, it is essentially like a string, right? You write down a sentence, right? So how do you measure the quality, and how do you know if you can improve it other than like talking to other folks and getting feedback and so forth? Here, AI can directly help you by like assessing this, right? Assessing this like on an individual basis, but also on a, like on a meta level. If you now have like, for example, at Zalando, 10,000 hypotheses, and you want to understand from a time series perspective, did we actually improve, like the hypotheses that we create? This is a way how you can do this on scale, right? And also like measure this as a new quality measurement. So this is the first dimension. The second dimension that I see is of course like related to 𝗵𝗵𝘁𝘂𝗹𝗆, what they also do with like silicon participants and digital twins. It's exactly the problem, the big problem that most companies have, right? They just don't have enough traffic to do proper A/B tests, right? And like what prevents us from, like thinking about a user or like copying this user as an agent and exposing this user with a few assumptions of like what kind of attributes this user has towards a new experience, right? And saying, okay, we measure the delta between a control and a treatment. So you can basically use AI to copy or mirror your audience, which we call digital twins or silicon participants and so forth, right? And this is, of course, an absolute game changer, right? And when I pitch this or when I explain this, then usually the challenge from many people is, well, they can never fully replace like real participants. And I agree, right? No one said that that they should, right?
Yeah.
But I'm convinced that to a certain extent we can, create a certain accuracy of this, right? And if we start measuring at least this, right? So for example, before we run an A/B test, we by default run like an artificial test, right? And if we do this long enough, we will see some patterns, I'm pretty much convinced. And if we then see that the delta between like a real test and like an artificial test is like, let's say 20% or 10%, this is a new tool in the toolkit of a product manager, in my opinion, right? That doesn't mean that you replace all A/B tests with this test, right? With this way of testing, but you can decide, right? Just like now, I also don't solve everything with an A/B test right now. Sometimes I just do interviews, or I look at data, and if I don't see a risk, or if I decide that I don't want to do a proper A/B test, I can ship it also with like a different method, right? But this is just another, tool in the toolkit of the product manager, and I think that's super valuable.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, they listen, right? They probably think, yeah, but they're so biased and AI and I don't do it. But it's not just a feeling, right? You shared some research with me, but I also saw some research where it actually shows that these LLMs, right, which are ultimately the technology behind this, are actually quite good, even without any context already, to like mirror audiences, right? Because at the end, that's what they trained on, right? They're trained on internet data, which kind of resembles, at least to some degree, society, right? And if you then give it even more context, like maybe from previous experiments and how people reacted, or information about the users, right? There's a lot of evidence that this can be done, right? I don't know if you have anything to add to the general claim, but I would recommend to everyone watching to take a look.
Yeah, I mean, like what I always say is like, think of like a celebrity that you like, where a lot of content is out there already, and think of like asking this person a question versus asking this question to ChatGPT or any LLM to mimic this person. I'm pretty sure the answer will be quite similar, right?
Yeah.
And if you can do this on an individual basis, why can't you not do this on a broader basis, which is essentially like an A/B test, right? And I think this kind of makes it clear. Of course, there are a lot of things that still need to be solved, right? But like, I think all of this is just a matter of time. And I think it's also like the, kind of the task, or like the idea of science, to think ahead, right? Like how will this look like in 5 years? What question will we address? And like, to go into this, right? Like, in my opinion, then we will talk about things like, I don't know, like when we run A/B tests, right? I rarely see a test without heterogeneous treatment effects. So heterogeneous treatment effect means that a test is affecting one subgroup of users different than another subgroup. So for example, old people react different than young people to a new experience, right? And I think the question that we will ask ourselves then is like, how should we formulate these segments? How granular should we make them, right? And because like I can start, differentiating between people from France versus people from Germany, but I can also say like, okay, I differentiate between people from Munich versus people from Berlin. And like, how granular should this experience be? Because every segmentation in your code or in your, product also creates additional maintenance that you need to account for. It's complexity that you introduce. And what you then need to ask yourself is it worth to create this complexity for the lift that I gain in addition when I introduce these experiments? And I think those are some of the questions that will come up then, in my opinion. And this is for me, this is interesting to already think about something like this, right?
I see it. Yeah, but I understand it. I understand it totally. And I think, I'm not sure if it's the right frame, right? But I think what you said is quite important, because I have not even thought about that step, but it makes sense that the moment you introduce stuff like this, or you say, hey, let's look maybe at people or personas or segments, right? Like at this level, that of course more work is involved in there. And at the end, it's a question, right, of allocation of some type of budget, right? If it's energy or money or whatever budget you want to envision right now. And I really like, there's this one research group at LMU Munich around Stefan 𝗺𝗺𝘂, where they also try to optimize these like allocation problems, right? Like how much does it make? Like, let's say we have 100 euros. How do we spend it, right? That's the question that you need to answer at the end of the day, right? And does it make sense to go in that direction or not? And I totally believe, like you do, that this will definitely change a lot of the types of decisions that we can make. That's the one thing. And on the other hand, I also think that especially with not just using LLMs, for doing the type of work that you just described, like, I don't know, for example, mimicking or trying to simulate something, I think it will also make it more accessible to do the analysis itself, right? Because, for example, this research group around at the LMU that I mentioned, they do a lot of causal AI or causal ML, right? Which is ultimately trying to find what you said, these like personalized effects, or is it like a general effect and so on. But if you look at how they do it and you open one paper, you will close it the minute you see it, because there's so many formulas on these papers and you have to write code. And I think that's another area which will probably become quite interesting, where, right, maybe you at some point in your life you talk to an agent and the agent like can do it for you, right? And it will has all this information. I think pretty exciting field. So I get excited like you do about it.
Yeah. And it's still like, I mean, overall, it's still related to the same problem that we addressed in product management, like for ages already, right? Like, I mean, Melissa Perry, like escaping the build trap is, of course, still super relevant. People do not, or it's not that straightforward for a lot of people, that if it's not always good to introduce a feature, right?
Yeah.
If you see neutrality there, or if you see a neutral effect there, it is bad, because it creates new maintenance and things like this, right? So I think like for every product manager, it's like a good question to ask yourself. I have a product now, of course I can build new stuff, but is there maybe something that I can remove? And I think this is also like for organizations, in my opinion, something that they need to introduce or like think about more, because there is a misalignment of incentives ultimately, right? If I start as a head of product for, I don't know, like the search algorithm, right? Then I say, of course, that a lot of people need to maintain this and this is super important. But I don't ask myself the question, is it actually needed? Or should it not be like very straightforward without a lot of algorithms that doesn't need to be maintained and so forth? I don't ask myself this question. Why I don't ask myself this? Because my job depends on it, right? That's a very natural thing. But it's a misalignment, because the company wants you to say, hey, this part is not needed and we have new resources for other things. That's what the company wants you to say, right? But like, of course, this is not the reality. And I think this would be like a very, let's say, comfortable or new way of working if people would be like enabled to indicate something like this.
But it's a very, very cool way of thinking. I think it's very like non-conventional from most people I talk to, but I think it makes absolutely sense, and I agree with it. Do you have maybe, I don't know, like I don't recall how many years you have worked in these types of positions, but for a few years for sure. Can you maybe like name one anecdote where you really had the feeling, hey, that this is making sense? Like people felt the impact of what I was doing. Is there any key moment that you recall?
Yeah, I mean, like, as I said, right, like my favorite experiments is always like when we take something away, like, and for this, I have a lot of different anecdotes, like, that we just, I mean, it's sometimes so trivial, right? If something blocks users from clicking the next step and you move it away and it just increases like the conversion rate by like 40% or something like this, and it had zero effort to move this away, and you can clearly see this effect. This is something that I like. But like the usual anecdote that I tell in this context, which is not a clear A/B test, but like also like an experimental way to think about stuff, is when I worked at Like-Minded, which was a company, like trying to make group therapy available online, right? We were very much at the beginning, right? And we basically did a lot of interviews with all of our users. And in the end, we asked all of them, like, if you would have a magic wand, like, what would you like, you know? And they said, well, in addition to this group therapy that you offer, it would be nice to have like a, you know, like a single therapy, like a 1 hour with the therapist or something. And we were like, wow, this is very interesting, but like it would of course require a new payment system. We would need to hire more people. We would need to change a lot of stuff, right? And back then we thought about, okay, let's try to verify this more. Let's try to make sure that this is really something that they want. And like the first thing that we did is essentially sending out a survey saying, hey, do you really want this? How much would you pay? How often would you use it? And so forth. Everything great. Like they would use it all the time, blah, 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 all good. Yeah. And then we were like, okay, let's enable it. And we just did a very MVP style solution and just sent them basically a Calendly link and say, hey, you can book it now and you have to pay there as well. So we didn't really build anything, but we just sent an email with a Calendly link. Well, guess what? No one booked anything, right? Okay, so we said, well, maybe that's too shady, right? Just send over a Calendly link in this context. And we even built like in the next iteration, a button on the web page and said, well, you can click on it. And there it leads you to Calendly again, of course, but like you see it on the website. And also here, no one clicked. Yeah. And then we thought about like, okay, why is this the case, right? And we thought about this so much and like we had so many sessions about this. And I mean, like, what does it mean when, you know, people come out of therapy, out of a group therapy and tell you, I want another like single session. Maybe it just means they didn't get enough speaking time. And we were like, well, you know, maybe this is something that we should implement. And then we basically told the mentors in the group therapy to just make sure that everyone has the same speaking time. We also gave them a timer to make sure like that you measure this approximately, right? And then we did the survey again, like these interviews. And this was, I mean, before it was probably like 90%. So almost everyone was saying this. And after that, it was around like 40-50%, right? So still relevant. But in our opinion, this was the cause of this answer, right? And this is for me, this was such a clear proof that the users will never directly tell you what you should build, right? So this whole idea of requirements engineering is, in my opinion, needs to be a bit overhauled, right? Because what the user tells you is one aspect of many things. It's not that simple. They will not tell you what to build. You need to abstract this and you need to do a lot of like brain work to actually derive what they actually need. And you need to be open about it, right? So it might be wrong what you build in the first place, then you need to remove it and build something else. But don't leave it in the product, neglect it.
Yeah, but I think this is such a nice story because I read, and I think multiple people have heard about these fake door tests, right? But you could just like say, I do one fake door test and then, they don't do anything. But I love how you like thought then afterwards about, right, what could it then mean? Like, right? I mean, yes, you could like argue, okay, no, that they don't know what they want or they lied or they tried to be nice. But right, thinking about the need behind the stated need, I think is very, very cool and very inspiring to hear. And I think perfect anecdote actually. To explain why this all makes sense to me, at least.
And it's fun, right? Like, I mean, it's fun to think about. Like, I love, like, if I get together with teams and we just, like, look at data points, right? And we try to resonate. Like, what could be the cause? Okay, hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2, hypothesis 3. And then you have 3 new tests. Those are, like, the favorite type of sort of, like, creative meetings, in my opinion. Yeah. So.
Yeah, makes sense. To be honest, I think we learned already so much. We could probably talk for so much longer, and we will definitely in the future. But there are like 2 things that I really always like to ask, and I think you would be a pretty interesting person because you have this like very T-shaped also skill set with you. And I'm not sure which question to ask first, but basically I have 2 questions. The one question is, if you hire people, what are you looking for? What are you asking them? And really linked to that kind of is, what do you think are actually skills that people like should bring? Of course, very role dependent, but let's say someone wants to go into maybe the analytics or data field, or maybe like into the product field, what would you say really people should nowadays focus their attention on and are skills they need?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. I think the answer that you get is usually unsatisfactory. Like what I very honestly say is, hiring and recruiting is subjective fact.
Sure.
You cannot change this, right? So that takes the whole, people taking it personal and things like this. There are things that you can influence for sure, but there are a lot of things that you cannot influence, right? That I want to say first. What I'm looking for, I would say, it's most of the time. Of course, it depends on the position, but most of the time it's not really hard skills, right? It's most of the time rather soft skills still. Like communication is, in my opinion, becomes even more important with AI. So just to give you like a very concrete example, everyone can create now like a 10-page PRD in like 1 minute, right?
Yeah.
But that just makes changes the discipline a bit. If the production of pure content is very easy, then you need to make sure that you still communicate this in a way that is like, consumable for everyone that needs to understand it, right? That means you need to structure it nicer. You need to think of visuals. You need to think like how you can get this over in this like super noisy world that we're currently in, where there's just so much content and everyone can, recreate this. So this is something that I, consider currently like super important, right? And also like, things like that we just talked about, right? That you also have like some stories of failure, that you show a certain amount of vulnerability. I think this is important. I think that you also have like a certain amount of humor, in my opinion, is also important because, you spend a lot of time with folks.
Sure.
So to sort of like, of course, it's not always fun and sometimes you need to be serious. But if I work together with people, I think it's nice if they can read the room a bit and understand, okay, now we can, take the first 10 minutes and just tell a few jokes. And then, we have the actual meetings. That sometimes happens. And just to be fun around with, right? Of course, there are certain skills needed, right? But most of the time, the tech companies, they're so different. It's like,
Sure.
you need to learn anyway. That's maybe also like another point. Like, of course, you always say growth mindset in this context.
Yeah.
Hard to test, hard to assess in an interview. But of course, this is the ideal state that you want, right? Someone who says, I want to learn something new here. I know a couple of things. I have a couple of frameworks. I've been in a couple of situations, but it's not like I think I can apply this directly, but I have this as like some of experience that I can use, right? This is something that I like. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but it's fair. And I mean, like, as you said, right? Probably knowing about the things that we talked about, experimentation and so on, doesn't hurt, right?
Sure.
Right, like having skills in that probably is helpful, irrespective of that. But I agree. At the end of the day, right? You have to work together, and if someone is very smart but you can't communicate, right, doesn't help the situation. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
And I would even challenge this, right? Like, I know if you're like very smart, you also know like how to, that the smartest people that I know, they just take very complicated things and make them very easy to understand, right? Or like boil them down in a way that the audience that you're confronted with just directly gets it, right? And so it's kind of really, it's not binary.
Okay, yeah, I understand your point. Maybe one more thing that I always like to ask also people is if there are maybe, either roles that exist already, right, but they're basically overlooked. I mean, you mentioned it, right? People go to university, study management. Everyone wants to become a consultant or a banker or a VC investor or something like this, right? I'm pretty sure there's a lot of roles that people don't know so much about, or that you maybe also think will emerge. Do you have some in mind that could be like worth knowing?
I mean, as we talked about, right? I think there, like, you come across if you work at organizations, you always see certain like misalignments or incentives that are not set right. So also to just give you like what I always say, for example, is when you work as in an experimentation platform team, of course, your customers or your users are the product people that run A/B tests. But in my opinion, those are not the only customer. The other customer is the company that wants you to run the experimentation platform. And this is often like a field of tension because, like if I say, well, our goal, our ultimate vision is to, of course, build like an institutional memory, right? That I say, well, if I want to know something or want to know like how probably the user react to a certain experience, then I need to make sure as an experimentation platform that you have this data available. But like the people that execute the experiments, what kind of incentive do they really have to store this knowledge, right? So how, like basically, like why should they document their experience at a place that I tell them to? This is, in my opinion, a certain misalignment. They will document this or they will work on this in a way that is most convenient for them in order to be fast, which is, by the way, also what I want, right? So here's, for example, something where I see these kind of like misalignments, then I thought about a lot that maybe those are things that can create new roles, right? And in this context, it would just be solely people who are responsible for like, I don't know, holding the documentation together or like making sure that, like we document stuff or working on the institutional memory and supporting, these kind of like misalignments, right? So this is one thing that I can think of. But also like in general, like the roles, as I mentioned before, due to this misalignment and incentives, I think will just change a lot and will just like, you need to be more flexible. And this is also something that organizations need to take into account, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. And maybe one question related to this and what you said before. In your job, or also maybe the product managers that may be a bit more junior under you in your orgs, do you or do they actively analyze the data themselves as well, or do they have like people who do this for them? And do you think that the split still will exist, or do you think over time we might have like, I don't know, product manager / scientists, researcher kind of roles more?
Yeah, I also tend to think that the roles merge more and more, right? Because one individual person can do more and more. It basically goes into the same direction as with like T-shaped people, that it goes even broader, right? But I would share this hypothesis, right? But I can also imagine, like that the specification that people work in is like so granular and so small that maybe at some point we will, like have new kind of differentiations that, I don't know, like that you're so specialized, right? That it's not like everyone can do everything, but like major tasks that are today core, but just become trivial in the future. So this is something that I can imagine. In terms of like junior product managers or product managers in general at our organization analyzing data, I think it depends a lot, right? So it depends, first of all, on the setup, right? Like if you have like very weird data in a very complicated data warehouse setup and you need to do complicated SQL requests all the time, then usually folks work with like analysts. Even if they're familiar with like writing SQL and stuff like this, because in my opinion, you just need a routine, right? Like I always think like, yes, I can do all of this, right? But like if I ask someone who does this every single day, every hour, then it's just so much faster and it makes no sense. So you need to think of like if you delegate this or not. But others like that have this a bit under control or found like a setup where, for example, you create a nice meta table and then, the analysts, the product managers download this and just do their exploration there. they're very different setups, right? It really depends on like the team setup, but also on the individual product managers. And of course, there's more and more usage of AI as well. I think like these super basic functionalities in Google Spreadsheet, like I don't know, like when I was working in investment banking, I mean, you have no idea, like how I remember so many situations where I was like fighting with Excel to create like a certain basic chart, right? And
Yeah.
nowadays you just click, okay, like propose a chart, and basically it creates a chart in a beautiful format. So, I mean, we maybe underappreciate like these very simple hacks that used to take like ages and were completely pointless, by the way, as well. So it's really just busy work. So, yeah,
Yeah.
this is something that I appreciate a lot. Yeah.
Okay, but I think it's a pretty cool answer. The last thing I would ask you is, and I think you read a lot or you listen a lot, you generally have interesting thoughts. Do you have some like resources or maybe also people that you think that are quite inspiring to look at?
Oh, there's so many.
Long
Oh,
list right now.
yeah. I mean, like what I usually recommend is like a book which is The Right Kind of Wrong, right? Which is from Amy Edmondson, and she did a lot of research of like basically what you need to work successfully, and she framed or like coined this famous term psychological safety, right? And based on this, she wrote like another book which is The Right Kind of Wrong. And this basically classifies or like further specifies what we mean by failure. So you have simple failure, which is like something to just avoid through checklists and things like this. Complex failure, which is super complicated to avoid, but like you need to acknowledge this. And intelligent failure, which is essentially what we want, right? That we want people to experiment, to fail, and to learn from this experiment. And I think if you sort of like embrace this idea of failure, that it's a natural part of business, and analyze this with this like granularity, I think it's just very powerful and gives the whole thing like a nuance that yeah, that you own it just a lot more, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is something I would recommend. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, like, I mean, I would recommend that anyways, but people should definitely check out your LinkedIn. I know you're sharing a lot of knowledge and a lot of
Thanks.
papers and articles and so on. So I think it's a pretty cool person to follow anyways. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Then I would bring this to a nice end for today, at least. Thank you very much for your time. I think it was pretty cool.
Thanks for
Better
having
than I even already anticipated how good it will be. So I really liked it. And yeah, thanks for your time. And talk to you the next time. Yeah. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot.